Welcome to Crossroads. A controversial research program many of you now know about is again being restricted. President Donald Trump signed an executive order on May 5th about improving the safety and security of biological research. And the order takes aim at practices that include, guess what? Gain of function research, something we've all come to know about. This is where scientists add new capabilities to existing pathogens, and there are concerns it could get out, frankly. That's what Trump is talking about, in fact. In particular, this also addresses taxpayer-funded research programs in other countries where oversight and restrictions may, let's say, not be as strong like China. And they actually mentioned that directly, by the way. Now, first off, this is how the White House describes the need for these new restrictions. This is the official announcement. It says dangerous gain-of-function research on biological agents and pathogens has the potential to significantly endanger the lives of American citizens if left unrestricted. Its effects can include widespread mortality, an impaired public health system, disrupted American livelihoods, and diminished economic and national security, like global economic shutdowns, for example. Now, he says the Biden administration allowed dangerous gain-of-function research within the United States with insufficient levels of oversight. It's a little more complicated than that. I will get into the details of this. And Trump says it also actively approved, through the National Institutes of Health, federal life science research funding in China and other countries where there is limited United States oversight or reasonable expectation of biosafety enforcement. He said this recklessness, if unaddressed, may lead to the proliferation of research on pathogens and potential pathogens in settings without adequate safeguards, meaning, well, it could get out. You could have a lab leak, something like that. He said even after COVID-19 revealed the risk of such practices. On that note, remember, too, the Trump administration has officially declared its stance, including by changing the COVID-19 website, declaring that a lab leak is the most plausible origin of the pandemic. Now, this issue around this type of research, it did become a lot more partisan. This used to not be a partisan issue. In fact, even the World Health Organization was kind of against this stuff. Even the Obama administration was against it. I will get into the details. But look, this used to not be so political. I'd say actually restrictions along these lines, if you go back, they were mainly started under the Obama administration, not the programs, but the restrictions on them. It used to be kind of a free-for-all. Now look, some of the loopholes on this were opened actually back in 2017. And, it was pretty early on in the Trump administration. I don't know if he actually even knew about it because he would have just been inaugurated. Since then, well, it's kind of been back and forth. They restrict it, they open it up, they restrict it, they open it up. The bulk of the controversies, if you want to go trace it back, it goes back to the avian flu in China, H5N1, right, the bird flu. Way back in 2012, what was happening? Well, the World Health Organization, the WHO, they were addressing the problem of virus researchers modifying viruses. In other words, gain-of-function research. You're taking a virus and you're messing with it. You're modifying it. You're adding new capabilities to it. And the World Health Organization noted, they say WHO convened the meeting as a first step to facilitate the discussion of differing opinions that have arisen in recent months after two research groups, one in the Netherlands and the other based in the United States, have created versions of the H5N1 influenza virus, which are more transmissible in mammals than the H5N1 virus that occurs naturally. In other words, researchers in the United States, researchers in the Netherlands had actually taken the avian flu and made it so that it was more deadly. They made it so that it could be transmitted, in other words, a contagious disease, not just between birds, but between mammals. And it also recommended that they extend a, quote, temporary moratorium on research with new laboratory-modified H5N1 viruses. They wanted this research restricted. And they recognized that research on just, the naturally occurring form of the virus should continue to, quote, protect public health. In other words, you can still study it, but don't modify it. Don't add new capabilities to it. Don't make it more deadly, and don't put the entire world at risk by doing so. Because when you have a virus mutate in such a way. Typically, it's extremely deadly. You're talking like 60% death rate. And that's what they're playing with, right? There are reasons for it, which I'll get into. But look, this is what happened also. 1 year before that, 2011, the National Institutes of Health, that's the NIH, explained why gain-of-function research could be needed for that virus. They were researching it. And they noted at the time that H5N1 rarely infected humans, didn't really happen, and did not spread from human to human, which would kill about 60% of the population. But noted that because there were concerns it might mutate to eventually be able to do that, it could possibly happen. Well, we got to make it happen to research it. Researchers had to prepare. And they said this, quote, thus research on factors that can affect the transmissibility of the H5N1 virus is critically important to international efforts to prepare and prevent threats to public health. And of course, that became very controversial. Again, even with the World Health Organization. The full findings of whatever the heck they did, it was never shown fully to the public. In fact, the WHO even stated in their public announcement that they recommended to not have it publicized fully. Again, it was enough to spook the WHO to the extent that they recommended not showing people what they were doing effectively. And basically, it seems that in 2011, what they did, researchers found a way to get avian flu H5N1 to jump between mammals. They had it, in particular, they got it to jump from a ferret to another ferret, and those poor little ferrets. Then came the regulations. The Obama administration in 2012 and 2014, they actually started the restrictions on this stuff. That's when it started, actually. 2012, 2014, the Obama administration released policies on oversight of, quote, life science dual-use research of concern. And according to a 2018 report from the Bulletin, they say, quote, the controversy over experiments that can make H5N1 transmissible between mammals triggered a flurry of new policies on dual-use research in the United States. Dual use is important here, I'll get into it. They referred to this as restrictions on dual-use research. Basically, what does that mean? Dual use means it can be used for a couple different things. You can use it to save people, you can use it to kill people. It refers to the very fine line between pathogen research for creating vaccines and stopping pandemics and making new medications and medical studies, and pathogen research for military-grade bioweapons. Because this is not talked about as much, it's something being brought up by Trump now, but the type of research they're doing, gain-of-function research, while it is being done, we're told, for medical purposes, if you were making bioweapons, you'd be doing the exact same thing. It's identical. It's the exact same thing you'd be doing. Because, while the intent is different, and that's kind of how they differentiate it. The intent is different. The practice is almost exactly the same. Researchers take a virus, they add new capabilities of it, such as a new feature to be able to infect, human cells. Why would you do that? They were doing that in China, by the way, at the Wuhan Institute of Virology with bat viruses, by the way, as we've now learned. And the researchers find ways then after doing that to combat the virus. Hey, we made this thing so it can infect humans. Let's now make a vaccine or something like that, right? That's what they were doing. Now, on one side, that can create viruses that can effectively wipe out huge portions of the human population with the intent of curing something that could potentially wipe out a good part of the human population, right? But on the other side, they're also creating new deadly diseases. And that ties into the whole controversy of what they call Tier 1 agents, right? The kind you don't want to escape into the public. You really, really don't want them getting out. And that was actually what was happening at the time. The big controversy in 2014, it was around that. There were several biosafety failures. And aside from the fact that even the World Health Organization was saying, hey guys, maybe you should cool that down a little bit, maybe don't create a virus that can jump between mammals, they actually had some biosafety incidents. 2014, they had several. One of them involved an agent of smallpox. Horrible thing to escape into the public. Another one was around a bacterium that causes anthrax. Another thing you do not want leaking into the public. And the other one was avian flu, H5N1. Again, and if they were messing with it in such a way that it could cause a pandemic, you do not want that getting out into the public. And that caused enough of a scare that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, 2014, they actually moved and they shut down 2 research labs. So they took action on it. USA Today at the time, they said this: the CDC, again in 2014, will be implementing a moratorium or complete stop of the transfers of samples on all biosafety level 3 and 4 labs, which contain the highest level of pathogenic samples. Again, like the T4 labs, which we've come to know about because that's what we were working with in China. And they said this was until all labs are fully assessed at the time, right? And look, in light of those incidents, the U.S. government, during the Obama administration, put a full hold on gain-of-function research that involved influenza, MERS, and SARS. And remember, COVID-19 was SARS-CoV-2. It was a mutation, they say, of the SARS virus. This is the official policy released back in 2014, October. This was during the Obama administration. It wrote that while gain-of-function research helps define the nature of how many deadly viruses can infect humans and therefore help with, quote, informing public health and preparedness efforts and with helping develop countermeasures to potential outbreaks, that there were greater possible concerns with the research, right? Basically, they were acknowledging that, there are valid reasons for this research. You can do legitimate medical research with it, but they added this. They say gain-of-function studies may entail biosafety and biosecurity risks. Therefore, the risks and benefits of gain-of-function research must be evaluated, suggesting the juice might not be worth the squeeze. And they note that in light of the recent incidents at the time, quote, effective immediately, the U.S. government, USG, will pause new U.S. government funding for gain-of-function research on influenza, MERS, and SARS viruses. So in other words, while they recognized that there is some value to the research, it was determined it was just too dangerous. They had to put it on hold. It wasn't forever. It was a pause. And all else aside, the known safety breaches at research facilities, they came a bit too close to comfort to let them keep on going. That's basically what happened. Now, here's what else happened. Those restrictions stayed in place for a few years. The considerations on how to lift the restrictions, they kept on going until around 2017. It was February 2017. Shortly after the January inauguration of Donald Trump, and I mean, look, he was dealing with the Trump-Russia stuff. I doubt he was paying attention to this, nor was it something that many people were paying attention to. It was in that time that agencies were looking into ending the Obama-era pause on the research. And the pause officially ended very soon after that, December of 2017. The National Institutes of Health, NIH, they announced that they would resume gain-of-function research experiments at that time. They stated in their announcement that, quote, today, the National Institutes of Health announced that it is lifting a funding pause dating back to October 2014 on gain-of-function experiments involving influenza, SARS, and MERS viruses. They note that gain-of-function research is important in helping us identify, understand, and develop strategies and effective countermeasures against rapidly evolving pathogens that pose a threat to public health. And then came the other big controversies. Research programs would fall under the definition of gain-of-function. They were being conducted in other countries, including probably the most infamous location, the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China, which we all came to learn about. And when the COVID-19 outbreak hit, well, what happened? That became a key focus, of course. I reported on it, and I was heavily attacked for doing so. You can talk about it now, but you couldn't back then. That was along with the type of research that had been taking place there and the other safety breaches they had there. It was not a very secure lab, even though they were dealing with the worst pathogens known to mankind. And because of how the whole incident and response was politicized, and this became a partisan issue, This became part of the partisan debate. You couldn't talk about the facts of it, even though it used to not be a political thing. There were also concerns raised by virus researchers that the risks, again, may not be worth the benefit, and that allowing researchers to experiment using gain of function like, hey, humanized mice, let's see if we can mess with those key cells and make this transmissible to humans. What a horrible idea. Could let them develop vaccines and develop preparations for potential mutations. You know what? It might happen, so let's make it happen, and then we'll study it from there. Works if you don't let it get out, right? That argument basically kept any major restrictions from going into place for a few years, right? That it was necessary, they say we need vaccines. The next major update to all this was in May of 2024. This was late Biden administration, actually. Biden, during his administration, they had the PC-30 policy. And what that really did, it updated the policies from 2017. And basically, you know, contrary to public opinion, they actually expanded some of the restrictions. The Biden administration expanded some of the requirements for oversight and review when it comes to that type of research. So they didn't weaken it, they actually strengthened it. And they also put some new limits in place, including, for example, allowing gain-of-function research that had some type of clear public health benefit, like, you know, vaccine development, but you couldn't do it for things beyond that, right? They limited it more. That brings us to what just happened. Donald Trump's new executive order made this a lot stronger. The May 5th executive order, what this does, you know, to be clear, first off, Trump did not end gain-of-function research. I've seen some people saying that he ended it. He did not. This is not a complete end to it. Basically, what they did is this. They have made it so that the federal government cannot fund this type of research, especially done in, quote, countries of concern. So you can't, NIH cannot finance gain-of-function research in China. They can't finance it in Iran, which I guess they were doing for some reasons unknown to mankind. They can't do it in countries that don't have enough oversight. And again, this especially includes China and Iran. It also orders a strategy to regulate some forms of gain-of-function research, even outside of federal funding. Because I've come to learn there are very few restrictions on this if you're not getting government money. It's in the United States, you can actually start up a virus research facility with very little regulation. You can buy humanized mice, you can buy live viruses, and you can basically experiment in your own garage if you can get like the basic licensing. There is a shockingly small amount of oversight or regulation on virus research in the United States. I discovered this when I was researching the Chinese virus lab that was discovered in California. The one that, you know, you might remember there were rumors they found vials labeled Ebola. They said there was not Ebola. It turns out they never even tested it. They never even destroyed it. The local politicians had to pay a huge amount of taxpayer money to have it destroyed by a lab. They never tested the vials. They never even tested it. And what turned out was that that kind of stuff isn't even illegal. It was not illegal for them to be doing that because we have so few regulations on this. One of the things the Trump administration is doing, it puts more restrictions in place for transparency on research programs. It also starts a 180-day review period for that kind of stuff. And from there, half a year from now, they might begin restricting that kind of stuff more. But as things currently stand, this mostly just restricts things that get government money, and they're beginning the process of going after the private organizations. And look, the new order says this. It says, quote, "It is the policy of the United States to ensure that United States federally funded research benefits American citizens without jeopardizing our nation's security, strength, or prosperity." And Trump said, "My administration will balance the prevention of catastrophic consequences with maintaining readiness against biological threats and driving global research in biotechnology, biological countermeasures, biosecurity, and health research." Meaning they're not ending it, they're just making it more secure, effectively, right? Now, folks, wild stuff. I know people are really concerned about gain-of-function research. Again, if you believe in the normal medical community type stuff and vaccine research, there are arguments for it. The Trump administration, because of those arguments, and they seem to recognize the value in it, they're not totally ending it. They're just strengthening the systems to put safeguards on it. But in other news, folks, the Department of Justice, they gave an update on something else. It's pretty big. The Jeffrey Epstein files, the convicted sex trafficker who had the Lolita Express in Little St. John's Island. Now, the Trump administration, they've been saying they were going to release all the files. It's on the desk. They're looking at them. Soon, the American public will learn all. And that did not happen. So far, we only got a very small handful of them. The ones they gave to us, they were already public. They basically just gave us more redacted versions of documents we already had because they were made public through leaks. But they did make the official releases at least. The rest of the files, people were wondering, hey, where the heck are they? 2 more weeks, right, folks? 2 more weeks. Pam Bondi, FBI Director Kash Patel, it turns out that they were saying that actually there were individuals apparently withholding these documents. They say that they were able to retrieve those documents. In fact, Kash Patel actually allegedly went to the Southern District of New York where the files were being held. Pam Bondi was tipped off on the location of them. They say they now have received the files and they are now actually reviewing them. They're going through them. And Pam Bondi, Attorney General Pam Bondi, she gave an update on this. It's pretty shocking. She said this was during a recent press gaggle. Watch.
The FBI, they're reviewing, there are tens of thousands of videos of Epstein with children or child porn. And there are hundreds of victims. And no one victim will ever get released. It's just the volume, and that's what they're going through right now. The FBI is diligently going through that. I haven't seen that statement, but I'll call him later and find out.
Again, that's pretty shocking stuff. Thousands of videos, Jeffrey Epstein allegedly abusing hundreds of people, which expands the number of victims quite a bit. I think most people, they don't want to know about Jeffrey Epstein because he's dead, but they want to know about the clients. We will see if we ever get that. We'll see if there's charges on it. A lot of people have been waiting for this for a long time. They keep saying they're going to release it. We will see. The nature of the alleged files could mean that we will probably never see those videos. It would be illegal for them to release those videos, and you probably would not want to see those videos, I assume. But what Americans do want to see is potential criminal charges. They want to see, look, how can you be a sex trafficker and you go to jail and face charges, but your clients do not? That's the weird thing with this case. And if you're acknowledged to have been trafficking people, then you would assume they would know that there were clients. So who are the clients? That's the question, right? We'll see if we ever get those documents. On a related note, the Department of Justice also announced a recent series of arrests. This is part of something actually kind of along these lines. This is Operation Restore Justice. And this is a program being carried out by the Department of Justice and the FBI. They just declared they arrested 205 child abuse offenders. They say they also rescued 115 children. It's a lot of kids rescued from these people. Pam Bondi also issued a video statement alongside the arrests. Watch this.
We will find you, we will arrest you, and we will charge you. If you are online targeting a child, you will not escape us. The FBI and the Department of Justice will come after you, and we will prosecute you.
Now, FBI Director Kash Patel also issued a statement on this. He said in a post on X that, quote, "For the last week, the FBI and DOJ have been quietly surging operations across 55 field offices," which I assume is all 50 states and probably some tribal regions, "to take down criminals who target kids." He said, "We called this Operation Restore Justice. Our agents, support teams, and partners did excellent work rescuing 115 children across the country in the process. And they say their work undoubtedly saved lives and protected vulnerable kids from further horrific crimes. Operation Restore Justice is a powerful message. They say if you harm children in America, you will be given no sanctuary. There is nowhere you can hide. You will be hunted down and you will be prosecuted. On that point, too, they also arrested two of the leaders of an online child abuse organization. It was one of these, like, it's an actual satanic group. I believe they're called the Order of the Nine Sons. People say they're neo-Nazis. They're not. They're what you call a left-wing dark occult group. They're actual Satanists, which means they do things that contradict whatever the values of a society are. Like if Nazism is controversial, they'll do that. If communism is controversial, they'll look like that. They're actual Satanists. They arrested two of the leaders of that group, and this is a sick, sick group of people. They were going online encouraging kids to harm themselves, videotaping it, disgusting things like that. They actually arrested some of them as well. So finally, good they're getting them, frankly. Folks, in other news, though, the Trump administration is now looking at third countries, not just third countries, but in third world countries, as locations to send deported illegal immigrants. And now it's not just some ones they've been talking about. They're talking about Libya now. Libya is on the table. I'll be talking more about this after we come back from a quick break.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. The Trump administration is now looking at third countries, they call them, as locations to send deported illegal immigrants. And look, there's the prisoner agreements with El Salvador, everybody's favorite high-security prison. There were discussions about sending illegal immigrants to Rwanda, apparently. And now there's also talk about sending some of them to Libya, which apparently, like Rwanda, this is not very well known, both countries are actually already set up to work as go-betweens for migrant programs heading into Europe. European countries actually have agreements with these countries already. The U.S. wants in on that. The Independent said this. They say the Trump administration has developed plans to send migrants to detention centers in Libya on a military flight, according to Reuters. They say the flight could depart as soon as Wednesday, officials told the New York Times. They say the nationalities of those set to be on the flight were not immediately apparent, but they say Libya is in the middle of severe conflict, and human rights groups have called its migrant detention centers horrific and deplorable. There actually were some reviews by like Amnesty International and other groups on this. I'll get into it. They say the effort comes as the Trump administration is working to deter migrants from entering the U.S. This is a UK news outlet, by the way. And they say as well as send a message to those in the country unlawfully that they can be sent to countries with difficult conditions, let's call them. Now look, on that point though, a judge has already blocked this plan, which seems to be the trend for just about every plan Trump has right now. The Epoch Times says this: a federal judge has blocked the Trump administration from deporting illegal immigrants to Libya or any other third country without first giving them notice and an opportunity to claim protection under U.S. law, meaning all those helpless gang members, they'll now have a way to fight against deportation. They say this is after reports surfaced of an imminent military flight carrying detainees to the North African nation. I should be honest, we alleged gang members, right? Maybe we'll find out now for sure. They say U.S. District Judge Brian Murphy, in a series of rulings issued on May 7th from the bench and in court filings, said that any effort to remove non-citizens without procedural safeguards would be a clear violation of an earlier injunction that he issued on April 18th. And that's that Judge Murphy's April 18 order prohibits the Department of Homeland Security from carrying out so-called third country removals unless detainees are first given written notice in a language they understand, which could be a lot of languages, a chance to request a reasonable fear screening. Are you afraid? Well, you need to be protected. And at least 15 days to file a motion to reopen their immigration case if the screening is denied. Why is a fear screening important? It's because in the United States, if you fear for your safety, if you say there's a credible threat against your safety, you're eligible for amnesty. So it's a very wide open door in this country. On this point, they add this. They say that order effectively barred DHS, Department of Homeland Security, from deporting illegal immigrants with final removal orders. And that's important because if you've already gotten a final removal order, it means you've actually already gone through the process of due process to be removed. You've gotten a final order to get the heck out. That applies to these people. They say they've gotten the final remove orders to a country that is not their home country without first giving them a chance to raise claims that if sent there, they would face persecution, torture, or death. Again, are you afraid you would face persecution, torture, or death? Si, senor. You know? Yeah. Good, you're here forever, buddy. Our system is really open like that in the United States. Do you fear for your safety? Wink, wink, nod, nod. Yes, I do. You know what I mean? And it's about that open, actually. So they're now doing that. Well, so there's going to be challenges, I assume. But what's interesting in that is while this potential move is being heavily criticized, right? Hey, sending people to Libya. The European Union actually already has an agreement in place on this. And look, the EU is a lot more liberal than the United States is, just put it that way, for the most part. New Yorker said this in 2021. They say in the past 6 years, the European Union, weary of the financial and political costs of receiving migrants from sub-Saharan Africa, has created a shadow immigration system that stops them before they reach Europe. They say it has equipped and trained the Libyan Coast Guard, a quasi-military organization linked to militias in the country. These countries are complicated because a lot of them have very heavy tribal divisions even within the government. So when you talk about militias, that's how it is. They say to patrol the Mediterranean, sabotaging humanitarian rescue operations, which could just mean making them not traffic people, and capturing migrants. They say the migrants are then detained indefinitely in a network of profit-making prisons run by the militias, i.e., the tribal governments. They have an obvious bias here. Let's just put it that. They have an obvious bias. They say in September of this year, around 6,000 migrants were being held, many of them in Al-Mabani. International aid agencies have documented an array of abuses. And actually, this is an important part. They do say that there are actual human rights abuses. Here's what they say. They say detainees tortured with electric shocks, children raped by guards, families extorted for ransom, men and women sold into forced labor. So actually, even again, Amnesty International did review some of the conditions at these prisons, and they are kind of horrific, let's put it that way. They say this as well. The EU did something they carefully considered and planned for many years. Salah Marghani, Libya's Minister of Justice from 2012 to 2014, told this reporter. And they said, create a hellhole in Libya with the idea of deterring people from heading to Europe. Now, look, it's hard to tell how honest any of this is because it's so partisan. All of this stuff is politicized. And especially when you're dealing with organizations in Europe where you're not even allowed legally to challenge this stuff. If you do, you get labeled as a right-wing extremist, and you could be prosecuted. It's very hard to tell how honest the reports are, just being frank. There are also reports alleging the people held in the Libya detention centers have faced human rights abuses on that point. Again, it's very politically contentious. It's hard to tell what's true and what's not because it is so politically contentious. And especially in European politics, where the issue of mass migration, it's even more sensitive than in the United States. You can go to prison in many European countries if you even post things on the internet suggesting you're against these things. You can go to jail for it. With that in context, though, right, we're going off of some of this. The Trump administration does seem to believe that maybe conditions there are not as bad as they've been alleged, and they are looking into Libya as a possible destination for some of these individuals. They're also looking into other third country options, other places to send these people for deportations. Now, look, on this point, though, of deportations and, due process, that's the big narrative right now, Trump is also questioning whether individuals who entered illegally are entitled to the same due process rights as American citizens. I know a lot of you in the chat have been asking this for a long time. Well, how do you divide legal protections for American citizens versus non-citizens? Are illegal immigrants entitled to every right an American citizen has as soon as they step foot on American soil? Where do you draw the line? The simple answer is we don't fully know. This will have to be seen by courts, actually. The Trump administration is saying right now that if there were such a requirement, it would mean there would be millions of trials. You would never see the end of it. We would never, effectively, American borders would be over. There would be no such thing as border security because you step foot here, you'll never be deported. Now, Donald Trump made these comments on NBC's Meet the Press on Sunday. Watch this.
We have a massive emergency overall. It's an overall emergency on immigration. And if the courts don't allow us to take people out, if we had to have a court case, every single person, we have millions of people. We're going to have millions of court cases. Figure 2 weeks a court case, it would be 300 years. If you're talking about that, then we'd have to have 1 million or 2 million or 3 million trials. We have thousands of people that are some murderers and some drug dealers and some of the worst people on earth. Some of the worst, most dangerous people on earth. And I was elected to get them the hell out of here, and the courts are holding me from doing it.
Now, the due process debate, it is only going to get bigger from here. We're at the beginning of it, not the end of it. This will be a big debate in the United States. And the Trump administration is also looking to do more deportations. In the meantime, they're also just ignoring some of these judge orders because they also allege some of these judges don't have the jurisdiction to be doing these kinds of things. We'll see how it unfolds. But look, in other news, the Trump administration is now beginning to collect on outstanding student debts starting earlier this week. And this is actually a very big turn from the previous programs on student debt relief. Not only were they saying you didn't have to pay your debts, the government was paying it for you. And those actually continued under the Biden administration, despite Supreme Court orders saying to stop doing it. Now, aside from that, payments on those debts for many people were just on hold. Not all of them were being paid off. A lot of people were being told you can choose to just not pay your debt for a while. The Trump administration just brought that to an end. The Department of Education said this. They say the U.S. Department of Education today announced its Office of Federal Student Aid, FSA, will resume collections of its defaulted federal student loan portfolio on Monday, May 5th. Just started. It says the department has not collected on defaulted loans since March of 2020, basically from the beginning of the Biden administration. And they say resuming collections protects taxpayers from shouldering the costs of federal student loans that borrowers willingly undertook to finance their post-secondary education. This initiative will be paired with a comprehensive communications and outreach campaign to ensure borrowers understand how to return to payment or repayment or get out of default. While Congress mandated that student and parent borrowers begin to repay their student debt loans in October of 2023, the Biden-Harris administration refused to lift the collections pause and kept borrowers in a confusing limbo. That is true. There was a lot of mixed messages being sent. It notes the previous administration failed to process applications for borrowers who applied for income-driven repayment and continued to push misguided on-ramps, they call it, and illegal loan forgiveness schemes to win points with borrowers and mask raising delinquency and default rates. The allegation at the time was this was being done to win votes, right? A lot of it was done right before the elections. They say Secretary of Education Linda McMahon said, quote, American taxpayers will no longer be forced to serve as collateral for irresponsible student loan policies. The Biden administration misled borrowers, and they say the executive branch does not have the constitutional authority to wipe debt away. That was, by the way, the Supreme Court order that should have technically stopped that from happening. It wasn't that they couldn't stop student loans. The Supreme Court order was that the executive branch, like the president's office, they don't have jurisdiction. They don't have the authority to do that. It's not their wheelhouse. And they say, nor do the loan balances simply disappear. You can't just make debt go away. They say hundreds of billions have already been transferred to taxpayers, and going forward, the Department of Education, in conjunction with the Department of Treasury, will shepherd the student loan program responsibly and according to the law, which means helping borrowers return to repayment, both for the sake of their own financial health and our nation's economic outlook. Again, the argument with that is, hey, look, I have issues with student loans, I'll explain, but the argument with having the government repay it is that you're basically forcing every American taxpayer in the country to repay it. It's not like that money just comes out of thin air. That money is our tax money. And so you're forcing Americans using their tax money to subsidize what I consider to be a broken system. The student loan system is absolutely broken, in my opinion. And I've never taken out student loans, by the way. I'll explain my position on this. But first, let me show you something else. The numbers on this are pretty shocking. This is also Department of Education. They say today 42.7 million borrowers owe more than $1.6 trillion in student debt. That is a lot of money. That is like almost to the extent of which we overpay on government spending every year. That's a lot of money. They say more than 5 million borrowers have not made a monthly payment in over 360 days and sit in default, many for more than 7 years. And 4 million borrowers are in late-stage delinquency, 91 to 180 days. As a result, there could be almost 10 million borrowers in default in a few months. When this happens, almost 25% of the federal student loan portfolio will be in default, a quarter of it in default almost. They say only 38% of borrowers are in repayment and current on their student loans. In my opinion, if you have a system where only 38% of people are able to make it work, it's probably a broken system. But I'll continue here. They say most of the remaining borrowers are either delinquent in their repayments in an interest-free forbearance or in an interest-free deferment. They say, deferment. They say a small percentage of borrowers are in a 6-month grace period or in school. Currently, almost 1.9 million borrowers have been unable to even begin repayment because of a processing pause put in place by the previous administration, meaning it's not everybody's fault. Over the past 4 years, the policies on this have been all over the place. And especially if they were like, hey, we're going to repay your debt, you're probably not going to want to repay your debt yourself while you wait for them to repay it. Now, look, student debt's been a big point of debate in the United States. For a lot of people, this has been a type of debt that it takes some people decades to pay it off. Some people never pay it off. This is my personal take on it. The way I was raised, and I know this is not doable for some people, I was always taught, don't spend money you don't have. One of the greatest lessons my dad taught me. If you don't have the money, don't spend it. Never go into debt, never spend over your means, never take out a loan unless you really have to. I think a house might be the only exception. I drive a very old used car. I drive a 2001 Jeep Laredo. The thing is old. It is beat up on the outside, but beautiful on the inside. Not the interior that's also beat up, but under the hood, it's a fantastic car. It runs very well. And that's just the way I was raised. I was taught don't take out loans unless you absolutely have to. I've never gone into debt. I've never taken out student loans, and I'm glad I never did. Because for a lot of people, in my opinion, the loan system is broken. It is an absolutely broken system. And a lot of people not understanding how it is broken get themselves into very difficult to get out of situations, to the extent where you're paying like 25% of your income just on the interest on loans. And a lot of people you're not taught about this in school, so people don't know what they're getting themselves into. Now, in my opinion, and this is purely my opinion, right? I think the federal loan process for schools should not exist, and here is why. The way it is set up, even if you go into bankruptcy, it does not go away. It's a unique type of loan that you cannot get out of. It's like handcuffs the rest of your life. And I think one of the reasons why it costs so much to go to college in the United States, if you want to talk about access to college and poor kids not being able to college, get rid of the federal loans, and this is my take on it. If you have a normal loan process, what happens? It means that the person selling the product needs to adjust the price to what people can afford to pay for the product. Yes, that may still be expensive, but here's how that works. If you let a good friend borrow money, what do you want to make sure? You want to make sure your friend can pay back that money. If you have a friend who you know never pays back money or would never have the means to pay it back, you know that it is not a loan, it is a gift, right? So if you're giving a loan and not a gift, you want to make sure they can pay it back. What does that mean for a business? What does that mean for a school? It means that if you're having kids take loans to go to your school, you want to make sure they can pay back that loan. What does that mean? It means that you have personal interest in their success. You're not going to be teaching them underwater basket weaving. You're not going to be teaching them how to, change the gender of fish. You're not going to be teaching them things they cannot make money on. You're going to teach them things that can lead to their success, because their success means they pay back the loans, and that keeps you in business. When you have a federal system doing that for you, it means you can rack up the prices through the ceiling. There's no accountability on you to ensure the success of the kids going through your system, and there is no interest on your side to make sure the system actually works. And I personally believe this is why a lot of the college systems are so broken. Classic example of the problems you have with what I would call state interventionism. Austrian economics principle. I do not agree with it. Now, some people might say, well, why don't we just have free college like they do in Europe? It's a great idea. I went to community college. You can go to community college for almost for free. Community college is a great system. You can also join the military. I considered doing that if I decided to go to a four-year university. That's what I would have done, or I would have joined the reserves because they pay for your school. There are ways to do it that work. In my opinion, if you were to have a taxpayer-funded system do this, you would not fix the system. You would merely subsidize what I would consider a broken system. Broken because they charge so much money for it, and they do not have an interest in providing a functioning product whereby you could repay, them. And so I don't think it works because of that. That's my personal take on this. And so I know a lot of people who took out student loans, and it's horrible. I know people who have very good jobs and they can't pay off their loans because the interest rates are so high. I know people were paying like $1,500 a month on their student loans just on interest, not even paying off the loan. I believe this is a predatory loan system, and it is absolutely broken. That said, I don't think it's also right to make the American people pay for it through taxes, and so it is a difficult situation. Again, this is me getting into my opinions on this, but that's my personal stance on this. I understand both sides, but I think that what's often missed in the discussion is that the system itself with the loans is problematic, and that's my take. That said, folks, let's jump into some questions. I've been going on for a long time. If you have a question, leave it in the chat. Don't forget to hit the like button, and that says jump into it. So let's see here. Judy Akeem, you're saying it's very simple. Citizens have rights. You're talking about the issue that Trump's having between illegal immigrants and whether they have rights versus the rights of citizens. You're saying it's very simple. Citizens have rights. Humans have human rights. Being in any country you want to is not a human right. And yeah, that is part of the argument, right? That is part of the argument, is that, well, yeah, there are human rights, but we still have countries, and we still have borders, and we still have laws. If a law says you cannot enter this country, and you do it anyway, then do you relinquish some of your human rights, some of your legal rights, if you violate the law? Well, some would say yes, because look, you have a right to freedom. You have a right to vote. You have a right to own firearms. If you commit a felony, you lose those rights. You go to prison. You're separated from your family because you go to prison. I know different arguments on this, but if you get a felony, you can't vote anymore. You can't vote in federal elections, at least. There actually are some exceptions to that, I should add. It's not as clear black and white as that. And you also lose your right to bear arms. Now, should it be that way? There are different arguments on it. To what extent should Americans lose their constitutional rights if they commit a felony? But on that point, I think we can all agree, if you commit a crime, you lose certain rights. That is the very nature of law and punishment, right? You lose some of your rights by nature of punishment for violating the law. And so if you illegally enter the United States, do you also relinquish some of your rights, like the right to due process when we send you back to where you came from? That is one of the big questions. And the other side, too, is that because the country has turned a blind eye to this for so long, it's not an issue that can ever be resolved at this point because it's become such a big issue. It could not be resolved if you want to let 20 million people, go through a court system. And so I think on the Trump side, on the Republican side, this is kind of an argument over whether we even have borders or not, right? That's kind of what it gets to. And that's why this is such a complicated issue. On the other side, Trump is sending some mixed messages. Because while he's talking about the great border, the southern border and border security, when he's sitting down with the Canadian Prime Minister and talking about making Canada the 51 state right in front of the poor guy, what is Trump also saying? He's saying, it's crazy. Someone drew a line, the border between the United States and Canada. Someone just decided to draw this imaginary line. I'm a real estate developer. I don't see lines. And he's looking at all that beautiful real estate north of the United States, all that beautiful unused real estate of Canada. You know what I mean? So he is sending some mixed messages here. All right. I'm partly joking. Partly joking, but it is. I think we are at a point now where we're debating on whether countries can even exist. That is kind of where we're at with this, right? That is where we're at with this. Emotion 007, you're saying, well, we can shut down gain of function here, but the CCP and the Russians won't. Yeah, that's true. Back to the original story in this episode. Trump has put some restrictions on gain of function, technically just on U.S. funding for it. The technicality there is Trump is not ending gain of function in the United States. He's just eliminating some government funding for it, especially in other countries. We're probably still going to have gain of function research in the United States. They're still going to do it. But we're not going to be funding it in China. We're not going to be funding it in Iran. We're not going to be paying them to do it, at least for now. But the argument, though, that they're still going to do it in other countries, even without us, absolutely. That ties into a bigger issue, though, which is biological weapons and even bioweapons treaties. There are international agreements on bioweapons to not make them. The problem with that is when countries develop bioweapons, they don't call them bioweapon programs. You know what they call them? They call them T4 virus labs. They call it virus research because it's the same thing. There's basically no difference in terms of the actual physical process. You're taking viruses, you're making them human transmissible, you're altering them, you're adding new features to them. You're doing that kind of stuff. You're doing gain of function research. You're taking a virus and you're adding new capabilities to it. Technically, that's a bioweapon. Technically, that's also medical research. It's more like the very thin line of how it's defined is basically the intent. What is your intention in doing it, and how are you using it? Case in point, China, which does not have a bioweapons program, quote unquote, because they're part of the bioweapons treaty. After COVID-19, what happened? The Chinese biological weapons branch took over the T4 lab in Wuhan. Why did they do that? Nobody's allowed to ask, right? Don't ask, don't tell. Anyways, without a doubt, that stuff is continuing. Without a doubt, it's going to continue. What this really disrupts is the funding mechanism where we were paying for it to be done. And so that's the difference now. Mark Harmon, you're saying, I see more videos of empty cities in China. Where have the people gone? Yeah, there's a lot of speculation on that. A lot of information and evidence would suggest a lot of people died in China. There is some very credible evidence, and we don't know why it happened in China, not other places, that COVID-19 actually did kill a huge number of people in China. A lot of people died from COVID in China. Why did that not happen elsewhere? I have no idea. There's also weird new virus outbreaks in China. There is something going on in China right now. They have unknown viruses spreading. I have colleagues who've been making phone calls into China asking about this. Almost everybody we're talking to says they know a lot of people who are dying from whatever weird disease this is. A lot of people are dying in China right now. We don't know why. A lot of people they're talking to have said a lot of people who are dying had also received the Chinese vaccine. Is that the cause? We don't know, because there's nothing showing us anything on it right now, because it seems to be covered up. But we are seeing on videos, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen this by now, there are a lot of empty cities in China. These are not the ghost cities, as some might assume they were. A lot of places they're showing used to be very densely populated areas, and now they're absolutely empty. It is post-apocalyptic, horrifying scenery, and we're not being given any answers on it. Some of the little reporting being done right now, Epoch Times has been making phone calls into China, and again, almost every person we're talking to says they know a lot of people who are dying. That's about as far as we know it right now. Ashley from California, you're saying, I'm not saying college isn't good, back on the student loan issue, but the system here in the U.S. is a scam. No university president should be making more than the president of the United States plus $1 million house to live in plus a car allowance. Yeah, and I would say look at the cost of going to school. Look at the cost of college versus when your parents were kids versus, right now. It's insane. Again, I would say this is the problem of state interventionism. It created a bloated system that is unaffordable. And because it's absolutely unaffordable, you have poor kids who, the kids are, their math skills are not very good these days, folks. It's just, these poor kids, they're illiterate. They can't do math, and they're being scammed. And I'm saying that only half joking. The illiteracy rate of high school graduates is insane, and they're being taught a broken math system. Those kids are not going to be able to figure out how loans work, and they're getting into really predatory loans. I'm half joking here, but it's actually a pretty serious issue. You know, and what you have with these colleges is, yeah, like professors are being paid an insane amount of money. There's a lot of money in the research programs. You do have kids from other countries where the parents are like corrupt Chinese officials and they are paying for it, and they're getting a lot of money from other countries. But I would agree, it's a broken system. It's a completely broken system. And I think the ironic part with this is where people talk about, you know, they, in my opinion, pay lip service, because I don't think they're taking any steps to actually fix it. You know, these poor kids from poor communities and they can't afford to go to school. Well, is the solution to that to let them in and let them get college loans they will probably never be able to pay off for the rest of their lives? Or is it to fix the loan system to force the schools to lower the cost of going to school in the first place so that school is actually affordable, and to make it so the schools have some personal interest in ensuring the kids can get a decent job so they can pay off the loans? I'd say the latter is a better option. You know, and this is also the argument as well with like even centralized banking. When you eliminate the responsibility of banks, where if they give out bad loans, you know, if they give out bad loans and people can't pay it back, the bank might go out of business. That is one of the old arguments against predatory loans. Centralized banking kind of bypasses that whole system because it removes the accountability of the banks to a large extent in that loan process. You know, one thing the Federal Reserve does is it can bail out the banks. They bail it out through inflation. They just print more money. And the result of that is a lot of banking practices that some argue are good and some argue are bad. One of the bad sides of it is what I just talked about, that the banks have less responsibility and less risk. That's one of the key words, less risk, in giving loans that people may not be able to pay back. And they still have some process on it, but it's not too solid in my opinion. The other side of it is, well, the banks get more money. When they get more money, they can invest that money. You know, you used to have like fractional reserve banking where they can like basically take the money and then double it and then through that invest money, and it's good for the stock market. It's good for publicly listed corporations, but not good for mom and pop shops and so on. It puts a very heavy weight on the scales of economic balance. And so what do you have? Well, you get massive multi-billion-dollar corporations that you know may put a lot of mom and pop shops out of business, but they can better compete on the global market. So there are different arguments for it, and that's what you get. But I would say what you also get is a lot of people getting into debt traps. You get a lot of people who get themselves into financial situations that make their lives very difficult. And destroys a lot of relationships as well. There are a lot of people whose lives are almost ruined because of debt and because of these predatory debt systems. And one example of this, do you know one of the leading causes of divorce? I think infidelity is still the top one, but financial problems is, I think, number two. You know. And it's not just housing loans or car loans or student loans. It's also, you know, medical bills and stuff. The debt systems are really, really broken. And it causes, by extension, a lot of high prices in other areas. You go into debt, and it's very hard to get out of debt once you get into it. That's the unfortunate reality. And interest rates. Interest on debt is a huge problem. You know, if we lived in a perfect world and I could make the rules, I would eliminate most interest. Maybe not entirely because you need some incentive to have it, but I would eliminate most interest because I believe it's a predatory system. That said, folks, got on quite a bit today. Join me tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. What day is today? Today is Thursday. This week is flying by. Have a lot of great stuff in the works, so tune in again tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Please do not forget to like this video. It helps us a lot on the algorithm, especially on YouTube, by the way. Also, please leave a comment. Do you like this show? Do you dislike me? Tell me. I'm open for feedback if you think there's anything I can improve on or whatever else. And I also like reading your comments, so please don't forget to leave a comment. That said, folks, I will see you again tomorrow, and in the meantime, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.